It's an ancient technique, actually, a four-step process of taking down a society, and it was basically institutionalized and made into like a science in the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union got going and started spreading communism. And it's a great brainwashing technique, and it happens in four stages. But the first is most critical. It's demoralization or active measures. Again, activia meripernatio is how it's actually pronounced, and they still use that word, that phrase in the FSB, the modern KGB. It was estimated that about 85% of the KGB was not based on James Bond type stuff. They weren't running around the world spying on people. No, they were engaged in active measures. It's estimated that our CIA and many of our different organizations that will remain nameless, alphabet agencies, are similar in that regard. Most of you maybe are getting to understand that. But that's one of the reasons that Bob Whitaker was hired by the CIA. He was hired to do talking points in a closed society that was coming down. That type of thing. But that is all active measures of various different types. But the first step is demoralization. It's a great brainwashing technique, and the principle is to change reality to such an extent that despite of an abundance of true information, no one can come to sensible conclusions to come to the defense of themselves, their family, their loved ones, their nations, their race, etc. And it, again, is a dramatic brainwashing technique. And it takes 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation or a group, because that's how long it takes to educate your enemy in the ideology that you want to educate them in. It takes that long to get the textbooks out and to get one generation under those textbooks. You get the ideal, but it takes 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation or an organization. And there's many different ways you can look at that. The second step is destabilization. It takes 2 to 5 years to destabilize a country. There are three components of destabilization when it comes to a country: economy, foreign relations, and defense. The third step, and is most critical, is crisis. It only takes 6 months to bring a country or nation into crisis. And then once a country's into crisis, you go into normalization. Normalization is a cynical Soviet expression that comes from when Brezhnev took over Czechoslovakia. He said brotherly Czechoslovakia is now under normalization, or now going through the process of normalization. You get it. It's a cynical expression, and it can last indefinitely. But that is a critical process for you to understand, and the most critical is demoralization. Again, 15 to 20 years to demoralize, to brainwash a nation. And this is what you've been going through your whole entire life. This process was overdone in the United States. It was overdone in the late 80s. Yes, the crash of '87 was probably one of the last clear shots your enemy had to take down this country and totally get everything it wanted at the same time. In the late 60s, your enemy was at its strongest point when it controlled elements of the Soviet Union, elements of America, and it's the center of the earth, which is Israel. As well as, when I say America, I'm talking about Greater Anglosphere too, because London's a big part of that. But that is demoralization, and this process is well overdone in America. It was overdone in the late 80s. By 1998, something critical had occurred. You had the Asian collapse, and there was another opportunity, but they didn't have Russia anymore. They had lost the Soviet Union. Mr. Putin was in power. In 1995, you had another process that came up, a process that was very dynamic. I use 1995, that's kind of when AOL started accelerating. But in reality, the BBS boards, the old bulletin boards, most of you old white nationalists, the old-timers, the old racialists, they call themselves, the resist.com type guys, the revolutionaries. Those BBSs were around long before even AOL and stuff like that. We own the net. We own everything online. But that process, a new process of communication, totally halts demoralization. Demoralization comes to a complete halt anytime a new technology is introduced. It starts to neutralize it. What's the joke? What's black and white and totally over? Newspapers. The internet did that. It totally neutralized our enemy, whether they liked it or not. And we have owned the net. Organizations like Stormfront, VDARE, even the mundane ones like Ameren, the hardcore revolutionary ones that talk about real dealing steel or blowing things up, they get unreal hits. If they were any type of established organization that that the government would support in any way, shape, manner, or form outwardly, they would probably be sponsored by groups like Coca-Cola. Why? Because they get that many hits. Stormfront could easily make millions and millions of dollars a month off its web traffic if people would have the guts to advertise on them, but that isn't happening yet, obviously, for certain reasons. But you get the idea. The British National Party, which is, you can look at them either way, but I'm just talking about the web traffic, is outrageous. It's the highest web traffic of any political party in the United States. Different organizations in Germany have unreal web traffic, even though they don't say anything too dicey because it's against the law there. But you get the ideal. Time and time again, if you just look at Stormfront and the web traffic, it is outrageous. But how long has the internet been out? Well, the internet's, you're roughly around at 14, 13, 15, depending on how you look at it, let's just say even 15 years, somewhere in that area. We're coming into D-Day. Newspapers are totally over. Everything's been neutralized. Stormfront is in the top so many thousands of websites, and it stays there. Many of you are seeing blogs like even like Hal Turner. Hal Turner, Mr. Turner's blog, he's putting out information from a variety of different sources on the economy. And it's very well read. It's quoted in financial newspapers. Whether they like it or not, they have to quote it because it has that type of hits. But that's the type of things you're seeing. But it's very critical to understand how important this has played in neutralizing the process of demoralization. It went into overdone in the late 80s and then got put into a complete halt, and they haven't really known what to do since then. They've been treading water trying to get their deal done. But that is very important for you to understand. And there's many different ways to look at this four-step process. For instance, the Republican Party. The neocons took down the Republican Party using this very same technique on a micro scale. They targeted the Republican Party. They targeted the Republican Party because they were losing the Democrats. Your enemy doesn't have the type of control you think it has. They've been losing it since the late 60s. Yes, they've been losing it in a lot of ways. Anytime your enemy becomes visual, they start losing things. It is by nature. If you're a creature of the dark and you're exposed to the light, you're in trouble. There's an old saying, fortunes like mushrooms grow best in the dark. That's an old Rothschild saying. If people know how much money you have, you're probably going to be in trouble in a certain economic environment. There's always a certain economic environment around the corner. But the neocons targeted the Republican Party. They demoralized it. They took over the publications, didn't they? Over a 15 to 20 year period, they did all this. They started doing it in the late 60s. They started doing the 70s. By Ronald Reagan, they had their foot in the door. It's a slow, gradual process. Then they went into stabilization. They knocked out a few leaders. They targeted a few leaders as racist or anti-Semitic, so on and so forth, etc. Then they brought crisis to certain organizations, and then they took them over. And they've been in a process of normalization since probably the early 90s, sometime after the Bush administration, the first Bush administration during Clinton's. They started consolidating, getting ready for what was to come. And it's very dynamic. You can look at it in a variety of different areas. You can do this to organizations on a mini scale. It's done all the time. It's done to corporations, so on and so forth, etc. But it is a very necessary thing for you to understand because you've been under it. In the Eastern Bloc, when the Eastern Bloc was coming apart, the Soros Foundation, George Soros was using copying machines. Copying machines were a new technology. He was buying copying machines and putting them in there, and his organization was allowing different people to submit different ideals, to photocopy ideals, and to transfer them around. Kind of like a micro internet. It worked very well. It helped him gain power there. He's not our friend. We don't like him. I'm sure you know that. We have some differences with Mr. Soros. I'm just giving you an idea of how dynamic this understanding this can be. There's also another process ongoing. And mentioning Mr. Soros, right now in the United States and in greater Anglosphere, Anglo banking is in a crisis. Anglo banking was knocked into a crisis by the collapse of Lehman Brothers. We know this because it's obvious. J.P. Morgan Chase took under Bear Stearns. Yes, it was a take under. A take under from J.P. Morgan for $1. Yeah, they crushed Bear Stearns and took him under for $1, and it was shell shock. The next shell shock happened at Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers was allowed to go under by someone at the Treasury. Never has a bank of that size been allowed to go under in the history of the world. It doesn't make